I happened to watch a French film a few days ago that I had in my DVD collection, but never managed to watch. A film that seemed to be forgotten nowadays. So I watched it unprepared. I realized it is a very fine example of not only French gangster films, but gangster films in general. So I wanted to know more about it to understand why it is not so well known despite of its very unique qualities. To answer this question turned out to be fairly easy, but other questions emerged as well. I started to dig more and what I found was shocking. I speak about Classe Tous Risques, which means all risk class. The English title was The Big Risk. In Germany, they simply made out of it The Pandas Chased. German distributors took some liberties enhancing the titles to increase the market appeal. Unfortunately, the German titles gave the films a rather cheap touch. The film Classe Tous Risques was shot in the last 4 months of 1959 and came out in March 1960. It was adapted from a novel by José Giovanni, who also co-wrote the screenplay together with the director Claude Sautet and Pascal Jardin. The plot premise is simple. The gangster Abel Davos, sentenced to death, is on run with his family with 2 kids. The Italian police is closing in, so he tries to bring his family over from Milano to France. But first he robs together with a friend 2 bank couriers in Milano at daylight on a busy street. The chase then doesn't go fully to plan, and the main character, Abel Davos, played by Lino Ventura, requests from his gangster mates in Paris to be rescued by them. The problem is, they're not very keen to do this. The story has actually 3 parts. Without wanting to spoil it, I would call the parts Chase, Rescue in the first half of the film, and Reckoning in the second. Needless to say that the first half is nail-biting, full of action and very tense. Shot on locations in Milano, on the countryside, in Nice and at the Côte d'Azur, it is a very gripping experience. The Reckoning part then is about the fallout of perceived failure to help as part of a friendship. The part is slower, more focused on the various characters and the display of fatally self-destructive masculinity of the main character. The film shows the codes of the gangster world, their interest to transition into a normal life and how their past can catch up with them. The surprising element in this film is the nobility of the main character. He cares for his children, is respectful to women, someone who helps his friends, and someone who expects that his friends do the same for him. There's a melancholy about him, which increases only with the losses he suffers on the way. It turns out that this code of friendship is of his and others' undoing. The Godfather, published 10 years later, should have similar themes. Classe Tous Risques was the director Claude Sautet's second film. He should become a household name in the 70s for character pieces which were about the middle class. Already Classe Tous Risques shows his interesting characters rather than action. Interestingly, Sautet, having started when Nouvelle Vague emerged, was never associated with the movement. Some believe this was because he was not a film critic, as the others like Truffaut, Godard or Chabrol. The young Lino Ventura gives an incredible performance as the main character, and there is Jean-Paul Belmondo. When he then started working on Classe Tous Risques, he had just finished shooting another film, where he played a gangster. The film was called Bout, souffle, Breathless. Director Jean-Luc Godard. Yes, this film. In Classe Tous Risques, Belmondo is a sidekick, while Lino Ventura is chased. In bout, souffle, he himself is the main character and on the run. Comparing Belmondo's performance in both films shows that Belmondo can act. He wasn't just an action star, as in the 70s and 80s. In bout, souffle, he's much more cynical, while in Classe Tous Risques he displays a warmth, happy-go-lucky and optimism that contrasts the fatalism of Lino Ventura's character. Both films come out in the same month, in March 1960. And as you surely know, bout, souffle becomes this international sensation of the Nouvelle Vague. And that's the reason why it overshadowed Classe Tous Risques. There seemed to be a traditional gangster film with a strange cocktail of values on the wrong side of society. It is a complexity and ambiguity where characters insist on values while they are actually criminals and kill people. Now, looking at this 65 years later makes Classe Tous Risques very interesting, while the playful experiments of Godard feel a bit, should I say, superficial.
Et c'est un film qui qui terminait, pour moi, dans mon esprit, qui terminait le cinéma, qui reprenait tout ce que le cinéma avait fait, les filles, les gangsters, les voitures comme ça, et qui en même temps mettait un point final à tout ça en bouleversant, en faisant sa passe explosion.
Classe Tous Risques was not the only French gangster film in the 50s, so it was not so original, while A Bout, Souffle felt incredibly fresh. The importance of values of family and loyalty that drive the main character seemed to fade at the end of the 50s, but then there's this authenticity which makes the film so gripping. And where does this come from? And now we're coming to the really dark side of the story, or should I say, to the backstory. The film starts with an off narration, which mentions that the main character has been sentenced to death in absence 2 years earlier. This is shocking for Europe at the end of the 50s, and you wonder, what has he committed? As already mentioned, the main character is caring, loving, loyal, and yes, also violent, but still, it will never really be explained. I try to find out more, and I look closer at the author, José Giovanni. José Giovanni's real name was Joseph Damiani. His father was a gambler and owned a hotel in the French Alps, where Joseph would work and become a passionate mountaineer. After World War II, he was in conflict with the law and went to prison. There he met Abel Danos, known as La Mousse because of his girth. Now you know it. From 1941 to 1944, Danos was a henchman for the Carling, the French Gestapo. He was arrested when France was liberated, but escaped and joined the notorious gang Gang d'Extraction Avant, comprised of former Gestapo members who killed Italian and French policemen. Finally, he was captured and sentenced to death for collaboration. He was shot on 13 March 1952. In his book, José or Joseph changed the name from Abel Danos to Abel Davos. So the authenticity can be explained with José having met the gangster personally. But then again, José Giovanni could only meet him as he was in prison as well. And he was not in prison to make research about the underworld like Truman Capote, for example. So why was José Giovanni in prison? Or how could he meet a person on the death row? José Giovanni didn't make a secret about his past as criminal. His books were openly based on his experiences, and that's how he became a popular and credible author of crime fiction. Several of his novels were adapted to films by directors like Jacques Becker, Jean-Pierre Melville, and Claude Sautet. He also wrote screenplays for several others, and eventually turned into directing, helming some 17 films between 1967 and 2001. He was established in the French film industry, and his themes were masculine friendships and the confrontation of the individual against the world. The interesting aspect is that even though he was open that he had a criminal past, it took until 1993 that the full picture was revealed by the Swiss newspapers Tribune de Genève and 24 Heures. And here's the real story. Joseph was 20 years old when he joined the Groupe Jeunesse et Montagne Youth and Mountain in Chamonix, which was part of the Vichy regime at that time. 2 years later he joined the fascist French Popular Party, and then he joined the German Schutzkorps, which handed down Service du Travail Obligatoire, compulsory work service tortures. His older brother was a member in the French Gestapo. They blackmailed Jewish refugees in hiding. But after the liberation, the Damiani brothers and other accomplices with collaboration background dressed as French lieutenants kidnapped, tortured, blackmailed and killed a wine merchant and 2 brothers, electrical appliance manufacturers. Joseph Damiani was sentenced to 20 years hard labor for his participation in the Schutzkorps and arresting French men. He also received a 10-year imprisonment for blackmailing Jews. Joseph Damiani was deprived of all civil rights for his membership in the fascist party. For the murders, he was sentenced to death himself in 1948. That's how he obviously met Abel Davos. But then Joseph's sentence was changed by the then French President Vincent Auriol to hard labor for life. In 1956, his sentences were remitted by the then President René Coty, and he was released. His father was very active in campaigning for his son being pardoned. Joseph changed his name, and his writing and film career started from there. The curious aspect is that it was possible for him to keep the collaboration past despite the sentences hidden for so long. He even tried to rewrite the story at some point with claiming that he was in the Resistance. The British Guardian simply took over this part in its obituary for Giovanni in 2004, when they made him a French resistance fighter and his brother a member of the Corsican underworld. It is quite likely that many didn't want to ask more questions. Being on a death row in France at the end of the 40s and the beginning of the 50s was not only a sign that he was found guilty of something very severe, but the likelihood that it was related to the war was very high. So how did he manage to become a celebrated author without questions asked? As Marcelo Fult's documentary about the collaboration resistance in France, The Sorrow and the Pity in 1969 demonstrated, the war was one of the topics no one really wanted to speak about, or in other words, everyone was in the resistance, and this view was promoted by no one less than de Gaulle. France, of course, is not the only country that struggled to accept the full and rather unsettling picture of its collaboration with the occupying Nazis. It can well be that people understood Giovanni's real past, but also the implied past of the main character of Classe Tous Risques. In the last years of his life, José Giovanni tried to make good. He went to schools and to prisons, lecturing on crime and rehabilitation. His last film, Mon père, il m'a sauvé la vie, was about his past and the murders, but he blamed his uncle, Ange Paul Santolini. Giovanni's story is a unique story, a story of rehabilitation by using the own criminal past. Having said this, you need enormous talent to be consistently successful with so many novels and scripts. Writing crime stories especially requires the art of being economical with the information you provide. Giovanni seemed to have understood this fully when telling his own story. In our world, José Giovanni would have been cancelled. Also, just as a reminder, in the 20th century you couldn't simply go to the internet and start a research like I did. It is easy nowadays to get information, but it is also easy to make very quick judgments.